Hello, everyone. It's so wonderful to join the Children's Environmental Health Network to celebrate 50 years of clean water for children's health. And we have so much to celebrate. I understand that 2022 is the 30th anniversary of the Children's Environmental Health Network. I want to thank CEHN for the decades of work to protect the developing child from environmental health hazards and to promote a healthier environment. We're also celebrating the 50th anniversary of the Clean Water Act during Children's Health Month. If you think back 50 years ago, our waters were virtually unprotected from pollution. Rivers ran in colors, rivers caught fire. But the American people came together. They said our waters mattered, and they pushed for Congress to pass one of the most monumental pieces of environmental legislation, the Clean Water Act. Because of the Clean Water Act, EPA has been able to take many actions that protect children and the nation as a whole. Whether it's the treatment standards for wastewater treatment plants, regulating discharges of point source pollution into our waters, or setting water quality criteria for lakes and streams, the Clean Water Act is protecting people's health and well-being each and every day. While we have 50 years of progress to celebrate, our work is far from complete. The Clean Water Act hasn't worked for everyone. Today, in Lowndes County, Alabama, there are children playing in their backyards where straight pipes dump sewage right next to their toys. There are children in Cahokia Heights who are raised in homes with basements that are constantly backed up with raw sewage. There are families that live near rivers, lakes, and streams that are too hazardous to swim in. This is a moment for all of us to recommit to ensuring clean water for all. At the EPA, we are hard at work setting the foundation for the next 50 years of clean water progress. For example, because of President Biden's leadership, the EPA has $50 billion in water infrastructure funding through the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. And those investments will supercharge the next 50 years of progress. We're also committed to strengthening the regulatory framework that helps us effectively implement the Clean Water Act. For example, we're crafting a durable definition of waters of the United States that prioritizes implementation and protecting our vital water resources. We're taking action to strengthen the authority of states, territories, and tribes through our 401 water quality certification rulemaking. And we're utilizing our effluent limitation guidelines rulemaking to reduce PFAS into our waters. In another 50 years, it's our goal to ensure our children and our grandchildren have clean, safe water, no matter the color of their skin, their zip code, or income. We have come so far, but we have so much more work to do. Thank you for all that you do on behalf of people and our nation's waters.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this Clean Water for All 50th Anniversary webinar. Really honored to be here and really appreciate the introductory comments from Assistant Administrator Fox at EPA. So looking forward to this discussion, and what we're planning to do is have just brief introductory comments from our panelists, esteemed panelists, and then we'll get into some discussion among each other, which I know we're all looking forward to. I'm Nseidu Obit-Witherspoon, the Executive Director of the Children's Environmental Health Network. I'm also lead co-chair of Clean Water for All. It's a coalition working to ensure that we fight for access to clean, healthy, affordable, safe water for all people, a pretty basic but important mission. So we're going to start with Jeff Geisler, a senior attorney and clean water program leader at the Southern Environmental Law Center. Thank you so much, Jeff.
Well, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here, and I look forward to hearing from other panelists and for taking on some of the questions. I want to start by just kind of giving my perspective on what it means for the Clean Water Act to be 50 and how far we've come and how far we still have to go. And so my work focuses on the 6 states that our organization works in the Southeast. And I do a lot of things. I'm a lawyer, I'm a litigator. I have a lot of expert hats that I wear from time to time, but I think the one that is maybe the perspective that is perhaps most relevant today is that I also have 2 kids. And so I'm fortunate enough to get to work to protect rivers and streams in the Southeast and near my home and throughout the region, including those that I've taken my kids on from back before they could even sit up on their own, much less walk or swim. And so it means a lot to me what, the power of the Clean Water Act and what it can do. I think one way to think about where we've been and where we come from is for anyone who's had small kids, that they fall down, they scrape themselves and get boo-boos and those visible, obvious injuries. But then sometimes they also get sick, and I feel like those are the things that you can't see, that where something's wrong but you can't see it. Those are the things that are more terrifying as a parent, and I really feel like that's where we are as a nation when it comes to our waters. Back in the early 70s, late 60s, we had the visible, obvious scars in our streams and our rivers. You could go and you could see that they were open sewers. And the Clean Water Act was passed over President Nixon's veto in 1972 because that sense of having polluted streams and rivers was very real, and people could see it. And it inspired us as a country to move forward with what I think is one of the most beautifully written laws that we have. It's really an incredibly powerful statute. And we've seen that play out over the last 50 years because for the most part, when you go to your local river, you're not going to see an open sewer. There are places where we still have visibly polluted waters, but we've come a very long way in making our waters what are called fishable and swimmable. It's one of the goals of the Clean Water Act, to make rivers and streams safe to fish and swim in. We still have about half of our waters that aren't there, so we still have a lot of work to do. But the ultimate goal of the Clean Water Act, and this is where I think it really becomes more powerful, is to deal with even with those pollutants that we can't see. The ultimate goal of the Clean Water Act is not to make waters fishable and swimmable. It's to eliminate all pollution going into our streams and rivers. We were supposed to do that by 1985, so we're many decades late. But it's that goal that I think is really the heart of the Clean Water Act and really has the most potential as we look to where we go over the next 50 years. And so a lot of our work at the Southern Environmental Law Center has been trying to really reorient our permitting agencies, our state agencies, our federal agencies on that goal of trying to really go beyond keeping a safe level of pollution to getting to those invisible pollutants and eliminating pollution altogether. Because it's only when we get to that point, when we stop pollution from going in, that we can really get to protecting the most vulnerable in our communities, including children and their families. And so that's where our work is, and I appreciate being asked to be here today and look forward to the rest of the discussion.
Thank you so much, Jeff, and really appreciate you really centering your comments just as a parent, as a human being. And I think we all understand, whether you're a parent yourself, we were all children at one point, and most of us, I think the vast majority of us, definitely want our next generation to not have to carry the burdens that have quite frankly been created well before their birth. So thank you for centering that and reminding us of, I would say maybe even untapped potential, right, of this act, and so much more potential to go. So appreciate that so much. Next, we will start with some introductory comments from Mariana del Valle Priento Cervantes, Director of Strategic Initiatives at GreenLatinos, and also a fellow co-chair of Clean Water for All Coalition. Welcome, Mariana. And again, welcome on such an early part of the day for you.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for, trying the whole last name. It is a mouthful. Thank you, Children's Environmental Health Network, for having us be part of this panel. It's really, truly an honor to have such a wonderful cohort of water champions, and I'm glad to call all of you partners. As mentioned, my name is Mariana del Valle Prieto Cervantes, ella, she, hers. I'm the Director of Strategic Initiatives for GreenLatinos and also lead on our water equity work here. And so for GreenLatinos, we are conveners. We convene an active comunidad of Latino, Latina, Latina, environmental leaders, emboldened by the power and wisdom of our culture, united to demand equity and dismantle racism, resourced to win our environmental conservation and climate justice battles, and driven to secure our political, economic, cultural, and environmental liberation. And, before I was part of Green Latinos, I was one of the members. I was one of those individuals that was able to be convened and meet so many amazing individuals throughout my time with them. And a lot of individuals that have lived experiences that are struggling within their communities to not have access to clean water, or dealing with the aftermath of flooding from hurricanes, as we're starting to see stronger and stronger hurricanes and nowadays. And so it's always been an honor in really learning from everyone's lived experiences. And I think that's something that, as we're celebrating the Clean Water Act and looking forward, we really need to start to think a little bit more about how do we bring in more community that has these lived experiences. And so our vision really is to see a healthy and equitable society where communities of color are liberated from disproportionate environmental burdens, free to breathe fresh air, drink pure water, access clean transportation, and enjoy our majestic public lands, waters, and oceans. And I'm really honored to be having this conversation about the topic of the 50th anniversary of the Clean Water Act. Although I was not around, I was not alive when this was enacted, or even in this country when the act was enacted. I remember as a child growing up in Mexico and not having reliable water at home. I did not have water that I would go into the faucet and turn on. And so really remembering that, making sure that every single drop of water that we were using was done in a responsible way with much gratitude, and always being so thankful for what water we was brought to us. And so I think this is such an important piece of our everyday lives. It does bring us joy, it hydrates our body and to all other living species around us. And we would really not be here if it wasn't for water. So truly water is life. I would see that, and we are really thankful for that. And with this reality that many folks live with today, I mentioned my own lived experience and some of the lived experiences from our members. And it's really something that we are starting to see really big disproportionate impacts. We're starting to see impacts from climate change. Our Latina communities are dealing with extreme droughts and extreme flooding, weather events that we are seeing now, we're seeing today, and they are going to be exacerbated and are going to get stronger. So this is a really great opportunity for us to start to think about what water means to us and how do we center the solutions for the communities that are being most impacted. So for Green Latinos, we really truly believe that water is a human right, and that all communities, in particular communities that unfortunately have those disproportionate impacts to access to healthy, reliable water, including our Latino communities, have the right to access clean, healthy, reliable, and affordable water for drinking, recreation, economic stability, and opportunity, and for community health. We also believe that clean and healthy water is vital for a healthy environment. So with the Clean Water Act, it has done some important changes to the way that we deal with our water in the United States, and really has safeguarded against pollution, degradation, and destruction of all waters, including streams, rivers, and wetlands and lakes. And as mentioned before, over the last 50 years, we have seen some amazing changes, and I think it's now really trying to look forward and how can we right some wrongs and ensure that the Clean Water Act is that much more better for our communities and for our children's health.
Mariana, as always expected, thank you so much for such a wealth of important points, especially the grounding of the cultural experiences, which we all experience. All of our families immigrated here, right? So there are some comparisons that we see certainly within the United States. I mean, comparing our deep south to our coasts, and how responses are happening and how states are responding and or either getting in the way or actually being a part of protecting our waterways. I would add in our air and other places we spend time. as well as what's going on outside the US and the many lessons learned, quite frankly, that are in many cases quite basic. Taking, really good calls to question and challenges, Mariana, as far as what do we want, right? How do we bring in more communities with their lived experiences? What does water mean to us? And like you said, it's non-negotiable. We must have water to survive as far as our intake. Then it's the quality of life as far as what we're able to experience with our lives, right? So looking forward to getting into some of those important vital points in a bit as well. Thank you. And Katie Huffling is the Executive Director of the Alliance of Nurses for Healthy Environments, also a member, longstanding public health voice in Clean Water for All Coalition. So thank you, Katie.
Thank you, MC. Thank you so much for having me here today. And both can't agree more with both Jeff and Mariana's comments. As a nurse, I recognize, how important clean water is to life. It's essential. When you look at folks that may not have enough food and water, the thing that's going to harm you the most is not having clean water to drink. When you look worldwide, the thing that causes the most illness and death in young children is diarrheal diseases, which are most often caused by lack of access to clean water. And so I feel like we have such an amazing resource here in the United States with the Clean Water Act that is working to give access to everyone to clean, healthy water. When you talk to public health experts, often at the top of their list of public health accomplishments in the 20th century is access to clean water. I mean, it is truly amazing how much it's transformed the lives of people across the past, century and a half almost now, water purification and recognizing the importance of clean water. When my organization first really started looking at clean water issues, I guess a little over 5-6 years ago now, I just remember, as we delve deeper and deeper into this issue, you realize both the complexity of it, but also so many opportunities that we have and just how important clean water is to healthcare. When I think of how many times a nurse in a hospital washes their hands, or the amount of laundry that we do in the hospital, or giving a baby their first bath, like we can't do our jobs without clean water. And it really made me appreciate the regulations that we have in the United States, such as the Clean Water Act, that ensure that we have clean water to support the health of everyone living and working here in the United States. We published a first edition of a report on clean water and health in 2017. And at that time, I spoke with a nurse who was living in Toledo, and they had a really significant algae problem one summer. And, she talked about how she hadn't realized how much she had taken for granted that when she turned on the tap in her house, the clean water would come out. And with that type of algae bloom, that there's nothing that you can do as far as, a homeowner, or, a citizen with that water. You can't boil the algae away. So you just can't use that water at all until they're able to get the filter out the algae out of the system. And, I think for a lot of people, it was a wake-up call in that area, just how fragile our clean water system is, and how we really need to be protecting it and thinking about the different threats that can occur to our clean water system. And so, I think right now with both the 50th anniversary of the Clean Water Act, I think it's a time to celebrate these many wins that we've had through that, but also to be recognizing that it's also really fragile. And such as with the Supreme Court case right now with Sackett versus EPA, that threatens the protections of wetlands that we know have such a vital piece of clean water in the United States, that we really need to be making sure that the protections offered by the Clean Water Act aren't eroding. I'd also like to give a quick example of something closer to home. I live right outside of Washington, D.C., right near the Anacostia River. And this is a river that folks have not been able to swim in for, decades because it's been so polluted. But now they've had, because of the Clean Water Act and other clean water initiatives, they're now saying, it's actually clean enough, folks could start swimming in it again. Like, it's truly amazing that this, you can have these reversals in pollution and, being able to access these amazing water resources. Like, I can't wait to see families and kids, swimming and taking having more fun in the beautiful Anacostia River. So I think there continues to be these wins and amazing accomplishments through things like the Clean Water Act. So, thank you.
Thank you so much, Katie. And as a nurse, the largest career in the world and the first public health voices, if you will, on record, it's really important to make sure that we are lifting up the justice angle, obviously the safety issues, the inaccessibility issues, challenges, the wins, and even bringing in regulation. And we all know regulation is only as good as it is if it is regulated effectively, right? So laws are only as good as they are. And these provisions, these protections that, for example, our Environmental Protection Agency, as far as their oversight and their ability to assist and be a true partner in helping to implement this act and the growth of it, as we move forward is vital, along with many other federal and non-federal players, for sure. All right, let's get into some discussions among ourselves. This doesn't have to be formal. If you want to ask questions of each other, if anything gets sparked in your discussions, just let me know. But I thought I'd start us off on the justice angles. I mean, it's again just non-negotiable that a country, for example, like the United States, with the type of resources that we do have, the understanding that we do have, the science that we do have, the lived experiences, many that we do have and have been on record again and time again, to live in an age where we're coming up to the year 2023, and we can not say that every community has. And in some cases, there are some communities that have never had that type of confidence that Mariana mentioned in their water for a variety of sources and uses. So when we talk about environmental justice, and I believe we all understand that environmental justice must be centered in all topics of environmental health. So how have the policies protecting water in the U.S. contributed towards disparate levels of access, inaccessibility, or these variances in health outcomes? And then what potential next steps could be taken to improve these disparities, in your opinion? Would anyone like to jump in there? Yeah, Katie.
So one topic that we've been really engaged in with the Biden administration related to the Justice 40 initiatives, where 40% of funds related to certain topics need to be going to environmental justice communities. And one of the issues that's been very challenging for a lot of communities of colors and low-income communities has been access to infrastructure funding. A lot of the funds that come from the federal government into the states require a matching grant of some type, matching funds in that community. And if you're a lower income community, a smaller community, you don't have access to those matching funds. And so you don't get access to any of these infrastructure funds at all. And so many of these communities that are having a hard time accessing clean water, it's because their infrastructure either has never been there or it's outdated and they don't have the funds to update it. And so one of the things that I think is really exciting is that the EPA is changing some of those requirements so that these communities can now access those funds and can update their infrastructure. There's also some Indigenous communities that have never had water infrastructure, which I think is just morally unacceptable in the United States, that these communities have not had water infrastructure. And so now there are funds for some of that infrastructure to be finally put in place, and for these Indigenous communities to finally have access to clean drinking water.
Thank you so much, Katie. Really important points about how we got here in the first place, right? Like many of us talk about the systems that got us here have been very intentional, quite frankly. The legacy of how certain communities, it's been okay to allow certain atrocities to happen, especially when it comes to pollution of our waterways. And yet we all know how vital our waterways are to all communities. And yes, we have this influx of, if you will, unprecedented amount of money coming into states around infrastructure. And yes, a good amount of our infrastructure, you know, it's not just Michigan, right? It's not just Toledo, Ohio. Katie and I have taken a few trips over the years to different states and heard these personal stories. It's every state in the country at varying levels, dealing with a variety of different needs, infrastructure being a huge part of that, the lead service lines and beyond. So thank you for that. Any other thoughts on the importance and vitality of justice, centering our policies around water, and then what we should be supporting, angling to do to support improvement and closing the gap on these disparities?
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Katie, for those points and, for grounding us in that. I also want to mention that, Children's Environmental Health Network, I have my little coworker with me, so you may hear him in the background. But for Green Latinos, we came out with a framework on October 15th. This was a year in the making framework that we were doing with 22 other Latino, Latina, Latinx organizations from across the country. And we really came together to highlight the disproportionalities that our communities are seeing from workforce development, farm worker rights, language justice, in some of the disproportionate impacts of the climate crisis in our communities. And so for us, one of the big topics in this framework is the Justice 40 initiative, right? And how do we make sure that there is in a robust implementation of Justice 40, so it's distributed, not just its benefits, but most importantly, the funds are distributed and provide a maximum impact for disadvantaged communities. So, first, I think one of the biggest things, it's something that we actually saw EPA try to mitigate a little bit, was the definition of disadvantaged communities, and clearly clarifying what does that actually mean, and that could really ensure that government program dollars are allocated to the communities that need funding the most and have been victims of the highest historical disinvestment. So that's one of the solutions that we have in there. And it's great to see that the matching requirement is something that is not being as required in a lot of the funding that we're seeing come down, and the historical funding that we've seen for water. But I think there's also this piece of implementation. How do we make sure those dollars actually get to the right places? And I think that has to do with providing more technical support and capacity building for local governments and community groups representing disadvantaged communities, so that they have successfully applied for those federal grants. And it really is going to be a lot of working with state governors and agencies and local groups and community groups to support the delivery of Justice 40.
Thank you so much, Mariana. So there's the substance of what you're saying, but it's also the again, a new legacy, kind of a new system. So by this influx of support, it's a very important milestone in communities, that if we can get this right, and unfortunately not take previous examples where money was squandered or not really placed in the hands of where it was intended, there's an opportunity for workforce development. There's an opportunity for a new style of training. There's an opportunity for really, and Jeff, you got into this, the economic benefits, the investment in community, right? For the short term, of course, to kind of put the fires out, but the long term health, economic, and justice benefits. So, Jeff, do you have any other thoughts on this before we move on to another topic?
I do, and I kind of want to go back to I think it was a point you made earlier and say that about this didn't happen by accident. We didn't get to where we are with infrastructure by accident. When the Clean Water Act was passed in 72, President Nixon vetoed it because it was going to be too expensive. And specifically what was going to be too expensive was the infrastructure grant program. And it was a grant program until the 80s, and the Reagan administration changed it to a loan program. And so we've done it better before. We've set it up in the 80s. We transitioned from a grant program to a loan-based program that really put the onus on small communities, small utilities to be self-sufficient, to be, to operate, on their own, and kind of said, you're on your own. And so if you're a low wealth community, if you're a community of color that doesn't have the in-house technical expertise, like, then you're not going to get that funding. If you can't afford to pay back the loan payment, you're not going to be able to get the funding. And so we are where we are by design, which is, I think, is both the infuriating part and I think the hopeful part, because what we're seeing now with this influx of funding is that the system is being redesigned. And the way that the Biden EPA is doing some great things, I think, in how they're preparing to send out this funding and doing things like promoting technical assistance, getting people out into communities to hear from the communities what they need, so that then the money goes to the right place for the right projects. But what I think we have to come out of this with is a system that works and that we continue to use. I mean, if you look at the needs for infrastructure needs, this is a huge influx of money, and I've heard it described as a generational investment. And if you look at the needs, we need it about every year to get to where we need to be. And so I think the task for a lot of us as advocates going forward is, right now it's making sure that this money is the infrastructure money that's coming in is distributed well, and that communities are getting a voice in how it's used. And then I think the next role for us is to make sure that this isn't a generational investment, that this is a regular investment, because unless we have the investment, once we have the system set up, if we can get that regular investment, I think that's how we will start to see significant gains in communities that I would say have been overlooked, but it's not even, it's more intentional than that have been actively discriminated against over the last several decades.
Yeah, well said. Thank you very much. So we are here also by, connecting to the child health, vulnerable child population part of this as well. So what do you see as the greatest Clean Water Act success for children's environmental health? And in what new ways have you seen water and children's health successfully and innovatively protected in the recent past? Anyone like to jump in on that one?
I just talked, but I'll go ahead and jump in. I mean, I think I think we need to acknowledge, there have been, we still have a lot of struggles, but I mean, getting wastewater treatment plants built at the scale we did in the 70s and early 80s, like that was a huge improvement. And I think the next big test for us is, what do we do for some of these chemicals that aren't as obvious, that are things like per and polyfluoroalkyl substances that are known as PFAS, forever chemicals, that are toxic at extraordinarily low levels. 1,4-dioxane is another chemical that kind of is in that same category, goes through our system, doesn't break down, has real harmful health effects. What I think is really seeing some steps in the right direction, and some states are really taking important steps forward in dealing with some of these chemicals. Michigan has been a great example of how they've dealt with PFAS coming through their wastewater treatment plants. They're going back and looking at their industrial sources and making sure the industrial sources are putting in the necessary technology to keep those chemicals out of our wastewater treatment plants, to keep them out of our rivers, and ultimately to keep them out of the places where we swim, fish, and get our water. And so that's what I think PFAS are going to be a huge challenge, those kinds of chemicals, emerging chemicals of concern. But there are some examples of how, using the Clean Water Act and using the tools that it provides us, if we use them, then we can really make strides in a relatively short period of time.
Thank you. Thank you for bringing in PFAS, which a lot of us have also been paying attention to. Thank you. Some other thoughts, Mariana?
Yeah, for me, I mean, I'm really lucky that my 3-year-old son doesn't necessarily love, those sugary drinks. He loves to drink water. That's like his thing early in the morning. He loves going to the beach and spending time next to the river. And those are the first word he ever said was agua, which is water in Spanish, and el mar, which is the beach in Spanish. And so I think that is something that, the Clean Water Act has been successful at, making sure that there is some of this fundamental clean rivers and beaches that we can go to and have access to, and ensure that we're thinking about our mental and our physical well-being, especially for our children as they're developing. And so I think that is something that, has improved through the Clean Water Act. Definitely needs a lot more improving in different areas. And so I think that is something that we can start to really think about. How do we restore our those nature spaces, right? Because they're going to be so important as we are, fighting climate change, fighting these floodings that we're seeing through stronger hurricanes, and also for our mental and physical stability.
Thank you so much. And this kind of restorative healing nature, what we have seen over time, whether it's part of our oceans or other waterways, is when we allow our environment to have the time to heal itself, it actually can happen. Our coral, it may take some time, right? Depending on what we're talking about, but it does require the stop of the continuous pollution and the dumping and the many other ways that our waterways have been contaminated and have been forced to break from their normal biological cycle. And thank you for bringing in your beautiful son into this as well. It's every child, it's every lived experience. And to know, I mean, just that his first word was agua. I mean, that's very powerful right there. I mean, again, it is life. It is part of us. It's from the very beginning. No matter what our experiences have been, good, bad, and different, it's something we all have a connection to. So thank you so much for that. Really helpful thoughts from all of you. And Katie, I don't know if you have any thoughts on this one.
I would just echo what Mariana said about, or just build upon that. I mean, I think it's just amazing that for most of us, we can turn on the tap in our home and we have clean water. I mean, for so many people throughout the world, that is not the case. And I think it's something that we shouldn't take for granted. And having that access to clean water really improves children's health. Not having to worry that when you turn on the tap, that it could potentially be making your child, incredibly ill. It's such an amazing resource that we can't take for granted.
Yes. Well said. Thank you. So climate change is another huge part of this. I say at times it's the umbrella that can consume so many of the other important environmental justice and what we call climate justice issues under that umbrella. So and Mariana, you've talked about increase of hurricanes, and now we're seeing these what at one time used to be one time a year, a decade storms happening 2 or 3 more times in the same decade, not to mention the ones that aren't considered the biggest, but are still very harmful and disruptive to communities on more of an annual basis now. So when we look at climate change and begin to see these effects manifest and continue to grow, how has your understanding of the intersections between climate and water health either changed or become more focused in the work that you're doing?
Like as I mentioned before, and climate change is really what's impacting, and it's impacting our communities now. I talked about the droughts, I talked about the flooding, and to kind of go a little bit deeper into that, there's a new report just got released stating how during Hurricane Harvey, low-income Latinx communities were disproportionately impacted by flooding. The Texas and Mexico border is experiencing drastic drought as we speak right now. And as the Rio Grande is dwindling at really alarming rates. And even some of our own members that are in Laredo, Texas, some scientists that are there are sounding the alarm. And, we need to do something about this. And if nothing changes, we are going to have little to no water in those areas. And so for them, and especially for our members there in Texas and Laredo, Texas, they're thinking instead of building this wall, we should be really starting to look at that funding and allocate it to investments of restoring the health of our water. So those are the types of battles that are already happening, and they're happening today, and they're happening in our communities. And there's this intersection of social justice, climate change, and our water. And so I think when we're thinking about climate change, for us, it's very hyper focused because this us and access to water is going to be one of the biggest challenges that we're going to be facing with climate change. So for us, it's really about investing in water ecological restoration. Water infrastructure should be the top priority at this point for many of us, and we're talking about this right now. We are starting to see that investment, as Jeff mentioned, and I really appreciate how he's bringing us back to the history of it, and really setting us up to think about that so that we don't repeat these wrongs, right? And so I think that is something that is hyper focused for us, and some of the solutions that have been outlined in our framework, our Latino climate justice framework, are in and around thinking of this, and how do we create some solutions and ensure that these solutions are top of mind for decision makers and for agencies through the next few years.
Yeah, thank you so much. And Katie.
Another issue related to climate change, and we saw an unfortunate example of this in Houston, is, you have this, these incredibly polluting industries, oil and gas refineries, chemical plants, cracker plants in these areas that, during hurricanes or other flooding situations, these sites can quickly contaminate the water supply in that area. And so I think I would prefer to not have these sited in these areas, how we can be moving away from these types of polluting industries. But in the meantime, ensuring that there's regulations and processes in place to ensure that these, as we continue to see these extreme weather events, that these polluting industries are not contributing even more through these flooding conditions.
Thank you, Katie. Katie and I were at COP27 in Egypt a couple of weeks ago, and I know GreenLatinos was in full force as well. And, we've all seen for many years, if not decades now, the impact of climate migration, especially from our southern hemisphere. Just as one of many implications, drought conditions, conditions where flooding of our agricultural crops or drought conditions both are not conducive for a healthy crop cycle, and the reality that our ranchers and farmer associations have told us that we're only so many crop cycles away now from irreversible damage of our soil. So again, we need water, we need food, we need air. These are non-negotiable, right? So one definitely ties into the other. Some of the same climate implications also by adjusting this, changing the paradigm, creating not just adaptation for the immediate, but also resilient type of solutions, community driven, have health benefits, economic benefits, and better our environment, which then curtail and reduce the impact of climate. So again, there's so many reasons as to why we need to get this right and why we have to use an act like the Clean Water Act and the success of it, which many have. And it's not to say it hasn't been threatened over the years, right? But the success of it, the fact that it has prevailed for 50 years for all of us in these sets of fields coming together, justice, legal, health, environment, coming together, all saying the same, including our federal agencies at the beginning of this webinar, that we have some good grounding. We have a great foundation, right? And we have to expand. We have to take the lessons learned of these 50 years and make sure that we take full advantage of what this law could be for all communities, would be my take on that also. Jeff, do you have any comments on this question?
Yeah, so I think on climate, I think you mentioned earlier, the increased intensity of storms. I think in southeastern North Carolina, we had 3 storms in 5 years that were 1 in 500-year storms. So that math just doesn't work out. And what you see when you have that is levels of flooding, repeated flooding, that usually hits lower wealth communities and communities of color much more intensely, because wealthier folks developed on higher land. The only place left for lower wealth communities was lower lying land. It also hits renters very hard, and so a lot of our disaster relief is designed to make property owners come out okay at the end. Very little is targeted to renters. So that when you talk about resilience, those are the things that I think about. These communities that are hit by repeated disasters, and part of that is our disaster relief mechanisms, but part of it goes back to what Katie mentioned earlier with the case that's currently in the Supreme Court about the scope of the Clean Water Act. We know that wetlands are one of our strongest protections against flooding, and right now the case that was argued in early October is going to decide whether or not wetlands get the full protection of federal law, protection that they've had for the last 50 years. And so there are, part of it is trying to address the problems that we haven't foreseen in the past, but part of what we have to do right now is just not make things worse. There are enough challenges with climate change that we don't want. The last thing we want to do is take away laws that we know are helping. And so that's what we'll be looking at over the next 6 months. I think it's going to be a really important issue that comes up when we think about climate change and flooding impacts.
Yes, thank you, Jeff. All really important parts, and the legacy, the history, and then moving into those lessons in real time, modern time is extremely vital. So in our last 2-3 minutes here, we'd love to just circle around one more time. And there's been so much important innovative thoughts, alignment with what's happening and what's moving right now at our federal and our state levels. We've talked about the infrastructure bill and other types of monies coming into our states, in many cases unprecedented, that could really, again, as was mentioned, could be generational impactful if used the right ways. What might be your last 30 seconds for listeners as far as whether it's prioritizing, depending on where you are, all states and all communities have their different sense of priority, but we all want to be able to say at one point in the future that yes, no matter where you are in the United States, for starters, you can rely on your public water system. You can rely on your waterways for swimming and recreation. You can rely on your water for cooking and other bathing and other important hygienic needs. So what might be your last quick piece for our listeners before we sign off? Or charge, if you will, rally cry.
I would just say, we all have a really powerful voice. And I think right now, it's more essential than ever to use our voice and to be talking with our legislators, with regulators, and just saying how important clean water is, but also that we want to make sure that those communities most in need are getting help to ensure that everyone has access to clean water.
Thank you, Katie.
Yeah, and I guess just to piggy off back that, use your voice. Your voice is your biggest tool. There's resources out there that can help you use your voice as well, whether it's GreenLatinos, Children's Environmental Health Network, SELC. We all have resources that can definitely help with that. And I encourage you to connect with these organizations, but also to connect with your waterway and take that time to connect with it, to give thanks, to just kind of be in place with water.
Well said. Thank you, Mariana. And Jeff.
And I'll just echo those comments. I think the most important thing that people can do now is show up, and show up, make your voice heard. I mean, I think this session is an example of how the diversity of voices being heard right now on clean water. And so find the group that fits your interest, whether you're in the South or you're focused on on kids, or any other group that fits your interest, because there are so many voices right now that are doing such important work on clean water. And thank you for the chance to be here with 3 of those organizations today.
Thank you, Mariana, Katie, Jeff. It's been an honor. Sorry for my son, but I'm happy to see it. Really, and of course, Assistant Administrator Fox, really appreciate all of your hard work, your energy, being stewards out here, champions in this important, vital work. It's an honor, and I do hope that our audience heard, if not one, multiple ways that you could be reaching out, connecting with resources maybe you didn't know about. You've heard about a few reports in this webinar. Definitely check out Clean Water for All. Check out all the related websites. If you want more information about the connections between climate and water, or any other, related public health, environmental health issue, I'm sure any of us would be happy to help connect those dots for you. So thank you for all you're doing. Let us reach out. Let us know how we can be helpful to your work. And my wishes for everyone to have a healthy and safe rest of your day. Take good care.
Thank you.
Take care.